Good morning. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearing for Wednesday, July 22nd, 2020. The first case on our agenda is RPC 35005-031, 1101 South Joy Street. And Mr. Ross Lichtenhouse is here to talk about the case. Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. First, I want to thank you guys for your time this morning. I also want to thank Chris Jikes and Irving for working with me on this case over many months. Mr. Jikes and I have, we'll say, reached an agreement on a value that we would like to present today. And Chris, I don't know how you want to handle this, the mechanics of it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. As Mr. Lichtenhouse states, we did. Upon revisiting the case as we were preparing the BOE package, we did suggest a revised value that we both agree on. Essentially, it's a bit complicated in the sense that Mr. Lichtenhouse is primarily appealing the retail portion only, but for those who are not familiar with the property, it's a mixed-use property, apartment and retail. So the revised value on the retail we would recommend is $159,104,200, which makes the total value $357,194,100.
That is correct. I concur. Thank you, Chris.
Sir.
Madam Chair, I think you're muted still.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll do this slightly different then since we're in agreement. Does any of the board members have any questions, concerns, issues? Or if everybody in agreement that we can accept this value?
I am.
Okay. No other issues or concerns? Okay.
No, ma'am.
Okay, so then I'm going to move to accept the reduction of the total of the 357,194,1. And the retail portion of it was where the change will be, and I believe that number is 159,1042.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's a motion by Mary Hogan. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so I don't see Barnes. Barnes, are you on?
He's on.
Barnes, are you an affirmative?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you so much.
Yep.
I
Okay,
see
so
him.
there's 6 of us. It's unanimous, so that assessment will be reduced to the 357,194,100. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, board.
Thank
for
you,
your time.
Ross.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Chris.
Mary,
Yes, ma'am.
Miss Thiemack is here, case number 2. She just logged in. I just let her in.
Okay, and are we hearing the case?
She didn't say anything, but I just let her in the lobby. Just let her in the hearing. She's here.
Hi, good morning.
And I'm sorry, your name, please?
It's Tracy Thiemack.
Okay, so I understand that you don't want to hear the case this morning?
No, we were requesting a deferral.
Okay, so here's what's going to have to happen on this. We do have a busy schedule today, 6 cases. Normally, just to ask the day before, we do not allow the deferral. But so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and proceed with the rest of the agenda. And if we run out of time, that will certainly work in your benefit, and we'll bump you to another date. So you can sit tight, or you can sign off and come back in an hour or so, however you want to do that.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
I'll hang in the background. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, then we will move to the third case on the agenda, which is Economic Unit 2900102A. It's a property located at 4501 31st Street South and 4510 31st Street South. And I believe we have Mr. Warren and Mr. Chitlick on the call.
Yeah, it's just me today, Mary. Blake's not on.
Okay, let's make that.
Obviously, you've already gone through 2 for 2 on procedural things, but I have the owner joining us for this call. He should be logging on any minute. I told him it would be closer to 9:45, not knowing how the first 2 would go. But
Okay.
Is there a way we could do the 4th case first, which is also an agreement in principle with the assessor and and Altus.
Okay.
That's our group as well.
Okay,
Rebecca
so
Miller is
we
on
will
from our team.
Move to RPC 350110001 at 505 18th Street South. And so this is also Mr. Chitlick. Okay, so what do we have going on with this?
Rebecca Miller is on. She's going to be presenting the case. She works with me.
Okay, so, I thought you said there was an agreement on this, so we're just having a regular hearing.
There is an agreement, but Rebecca Miller is going to present it.
There's not an agreement.
Okay, we're going to hear the case. So,
Okay.
Ms. Miller, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Yeah, thank you. So the subject property is an 11-story, 198-unit apartment building that was completed in March of 2017. I just want to, sorry, am I muted or you guys can hear me okay? All right, cool. I just want to take a moment to talk about the sale price of the property. Detail of what I'm talking about can be found on my page 3, on the bottom of my page 3 of my packet. The subject property was purchased for $73.5 million on June 28, 2019. The property itself was 97% occupied at sale, so it was a stabilized transaction. For this reason, I'm asking the board to consider the sale price of the property for tax year 2020 valuation. My value request to the purchase price is different than my target value. My target value, which can be found on my page 4, of approximately $71.8 million, was established by taking the reported NOI on the assessor worksheet for calendar year 2018 and using the assessor cap rate of 5.22%. And this exercise was done to illustrate that the current assessment of $74.4 million is slightly higher than what the property could achieve, since calendar year 2019 information was not available because of the purchase price that took place in 2019. The purchase price is a true arm's length transaction, and for that reason, I'm asking the board to adopt that. Chris and I were discussing this over the past few days, and he was in agreement of the purchase price, but unfortunately, the hearing was scheduled and no change could be made at that point. That is all I have to say, and I'd love to pass it along to Chris to finish up.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, we're definitely in agreement as far as the sale price that was achieved just over a year ago, open market sale. Really, we're flying a bit blind in the sense that this is a very new property and was experiencing quite a bit of vacancy in the year 2017. It looks like true vacancy was almost half the building, 47%. Stabilized very quickly to about 6.9% in 2018, and then per the notes by Ms. Miller and CoStar, came down to about 3% of true vacancy in 2019. The information that you see in columns D1 and D2 represent not only the market component, but the committed affordable. It has about 16 units that are committed affordable. And while it's important, obviously, to note that because they have different criteria that's used as far as the vacancy and concession allowance and the cap rate, it's really just to illustrate what's going on with the property itself, in that we're projecting forward using historical information. Given that we do know that it was becoming stabilized as far as its vacancy, we do believe that the modest increase in gross potential of 2.5% as projected by the county for gross potential is fair. Given that we're using the stabilized vacancy and concession of 6% for the market units and 3% for the committed affordable, we do believe that the 5% projection for effective gross is fair. And then we're clearly all over the expenses, and that not only did the appellant use our expense line, it's about a 6% increase in operating expenses projected over the 2018 year, well ahead of the county's per unit operating expense at $8,082 per unit. That being said, we do believe there should be consideration taken for the fair market value opinion from the county of $74,608,200. But that being said, we do note if there's consternation on the point of the board that the sale price should also be considered of $73,500,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Questions from board members, please? No questions?
Mary, can you not see me? This is Barnes.
I cannot.
I
Oh,
wonder why.
there you go. I can now. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got a couple questions. First one is, it says the owner is Carrier Family Limited Liability Company, but I don't think that's accurate, is it?
Yeah, it is accurate. So what happened was the owners purchased the building and also a ground lease. So that's could be why the name is a little bit off on the sale agreement.
Okay, I thought I read somewhere that Kettler sold to Dweck.
Yeah, that's correct. So Dweck bought the property and the ground lease agreement for over 100 years. And so that's why the limited partnership is named as the owner, but Dweck purchased it for 100 years.
Okay, so the Carriers gave a ground lease, and they still own the reversion to the title.
Exactly.
But Dweck owns the property via a ground lease.
Exactly.
That's
Correct.
what's going on. Okay. Was there I didn't see, and maybe I missed it, was there a settlement sheet included indicating the sale?
No, but on my page 3, I have information about the sale, but I don't have an agreement. I just pulled it from CoStar.
Okay, to me, it would be helpful to see a settlement sheet because often there's adjustments that impact price. I mean, you're holding the price, but there are other adjustments and so forth. So in the future, it'd be helpful to me to see a settlement sheet. That's all
Definitely.
I got.
And so just really quickly, at the time of sale, the property was 97% occupied, so it was fairly stabilized, and so it was a fair market transaction.
Okay. All right. Other questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
For the appellant, could you state, I heard that you were in agreement, you weren't in agreement. I didn't hear what the appellant, I do know what the department thinks the assessed value should be, but I missed what I think the appellant thinks the assessed value should be.
Yeah, of course. 73.5 million, which is the purchase price in the June 2019.
Okay, so the difference is 1.5% difference between the county's assessment 2 years later. And I'm sorry, this sale was in 2017, did you say, or 2019?
No, the 2019 sale in June of 2019.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
To clarify, our opinion of value was lower, but with discussions with the assessor, we thought a middle ground was the purchase price. So that's why our opinion of value is still less. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from board members? I can't see everybody because I got Rosa on the screen. I've got somebody named T. Themac on the screen, so I can't see board members. So if you're raising your hand, you're going to
I'm up. Greg.
I'm sorry.
Greg?
Hey, so I guess you can't see me.
Nope.
I was not sure, following along with the cap rates that the county used. Could you clarify? Because it looks like you've got a cap rate of 5.943 for the committed affordable, 5.193 for the market.
That's correct. Those are the cap rates that are applied via the guidelines and then the addition of the bid rates.
So committed affordable apartment guidelines, and then I go to the table high rise 2010 plus, and it's 5.9, but we're using 5.943.
It's 5.15.
Maybe I'm looking at last year's guidelines.
Yeah, 5.15, and then you add a bid rate for
okay.
Crystal City.
This is the Crystal City
Yeah,
bid.
it's Crystal.
Okay, all right, got it. I was just trying to follow that logic.
So
okay, thank you. Ms. Hogan or Mr. Penaranda, do you have questions?
I don't have any.
And none from Ms. Hogan. Okay. All right, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
yes, ma'am. So again, obviously, we'd prefer to have a stabilized 3-year history to rely upon. Given 2017's numbers were in the infancy of being stabilized, we used 2018's number and combined with the information we had regarding 2019 stabilized vacancy, true vacancy of 3%. We projected, again, modestly at 2.5% growth and gross potential, 5% in effective gross, while also allowing almost 6% growth in total operating expenses. That information and consolidated gave us a fair market value of $74,608,200. And we believe that should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Miller, if you take a minute to wrap up your case.
Yeah, thank you. So the calendar year 2018 NOI is approximately 3.7 million, and the department's NOI and the current valuation is 3.9 million approximately. And so the actuals are a little bit lower. And in addition to that, we have a sale price that took place in 2019, which was an arm's length transaction. And because of that, we asked the board to adopt this value of 73.5 million as the fair market value for tax year 2020.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's just among board members. Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to, my own thinking is we should go with the sales price. And I'll tell you why. When you have a ground lease situation, your range of possible purchasers is limited. And we learned that as my practice has progressed, a lot of owners don't want to let go of the land. So instead they do a ground lease. But when they do that, they have limited the amount of purchasers. You have to have a purchaser of substance in order to be able to go forward on a ground lease situation. And you have Kettler, who's very sophisticated. They're the ones that got it approved. And then you have Dweck, who is very sophisticated. And my own opinion, I think we ought to go with the sales price of 73.5, given the fact that it is a ground lease situation. Thank you.
Okay, other comments? Mr. Metzgen.
Generally, I don't like going with one data point as a trend, the sales price. However, in this case, the sales price is recent. And more importantly to me, there's not a trend. This is a new building, and we don't know how to take it from here legitimately. We oftentimes look at other appellants who have an up and down, back and forth, and no trend, and we have to take some other criterion as our guide. And that's what the case is here, and that criterion would be the sales price, this new sales price, current modern sales price. So I'm with Mards.
Okay. Other comments?
Yeah, Mary, I think I agree with Barnes and Ken. I think in this case that, we don't have a whole bunch of information for the whole year to be able to stabilize. I know Mr. Chicas did a good job going back to, previous years, but I think in this particular case, it is more appropriate to use this, the sales price. And I think Barnes put a good point to, including the ground lease situation.
Yeah, I agree. Any other comments, Mr. Hoffman or Ms. Hogan?
No, I agree.
No.
I agree.
Oh, and Mr. Yates, I'm sorry, yes. Okay, would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll go ahead and
Barnes.
move that we make the reduction to the amount of $73,500,000 based on the sales price.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second. Barnes.
Mr. Lawson? Okay, a motion is second to reduce it to 73,500,000. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous, 7-0. It's reduced to the purchase price of 73,500,000.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ms. Miller.
Thank you. You guys have a good one.
Thank you.
You too, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Chitlick, do we have the owner on yet?
We do.
And who is the owner, please?
Stephen Kahn, who's at the Standard Company. Stephen, are you there?
I am. Hello. Thank you. Good morning.
Okay, we've got that. And then, is there any way to put a board member on the screen and I don't know who T. Themac is?
She's case number 2, and apparently she is off. It was supposed to come off the screen, but apparently she's stuck there.
Yeah, I have you on there as well, because it would be easier to be able to see the board members so when they raise their
I'm
hands.
not online. I'm off the camera. I'm not on.
I know, but I have a big Rosa with a RT on my screen.
Don't know, but I'm not supposed to be on.
Okay. All right, moving back to the third case on the agenda, RPC, the Economic Unit, again, 2900102A, the 4501 and 4510 31st Street South. Mr. Chitlick, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property, please.
All right, thank you. So the property is Park Shirlington. It's a 2-story apartment building, 14 total buildings, just north of Shirlington. The property was purchased in 2017 with help from Arlington County. The standard companies, and Stephen Kahn is on the phone, who's the director of the Stephen Companies, partnered with Arlington County, who added $6 million of AHIF funds, as well as below market interest rates that are payable only to the extent that there's cash flow to do so. In exchange for doing that, the property became affordable. So you'll notice a pretty significant change from the original assessment to Chris's new test column. And a lot of that change has to do with learning that the property was affordable, and that change was done on cap rate. So the original cap rate was using just a market rent cap rate, and now the new revised in column F has changed the cap rate up 50 basis points to the affordable cap rate, which takes a good portion of that reduction in play. However, and the reason I wanted Stephen to come on is if you're looking at the page 4, the apartment I&E summary, you'll notice column C is operating 2018 per 12-month income, and operating E1, which is 2019 per 12-month income statement. What happened there was that the management partner, who has no ownership right, contracted with a consultant without proper authorization, and the consultant filled out an income and expense and attached a document that was incomplete. Obviously, that's not acceptable by Arlington, and if I filled out an I&E without authorization and sent it in, I don't think it would fly. Granted, I wouldn't. Don't worry, I won't try. So when we took this over and we talked to the owner, this owner's first property in Arlington, they realized what they did. So they actually filled out Arlington County's 2019 income and expense as well as 2018 income and expense. So the 2019 income expense was filled out and sent in, which is that column E2. And then after the fact, they also filled out a 2018 income and expense and submitted that. Unfortunately, that was after the board deadline, but that was submitted to the assessor's office. So I just wanted Stephen to come on to explain why you have 2 sets of I&Es. And I call the first one E1 and I&E when it truly is not. It's an incomplete internal document that doesn't include all the expenses. And Stephen, do you want to quickly touch base on that?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Jeremy. So our property manager, who is also an owner in other properties, but not in Park Shirlington, has a blanket agreement with a firm to provide tax appeal and evaluation services for them. They included this property in their scope of services for this year inadvertently. So they were not authorized by either the management company as a rep or by ownership to engage or provide any information on Park Shirlington. So what was submitted had not been reviewed and authorized by ownership or any other authorized agent or representative, and did not include all of the general ledgers flowing into that income and expense statement. So it was incomplete information that was provided by an unauthorized individual or firm working on behalf, supposedly on behalf of us, inadvertently. They didn't even know the property was affordable, as made clear in their initial submission. So when we were made aware of this, we went through and filled out the appropriate forms and engaged Jeremy immediately to make sure that we could get back on the right side of this. And so we provided the 2019 information, gathered the 2018 information as well. Unfortunately, provided that a little bit later, but both sets of complete and accurate and authorized information have been submitted, and we've made clear to our management company and to this other tax consultant that they're not to be engaged on Park Shirlington going forward in any capacity.
So thanks. So when looking at the information, the E2, the total NOI for the property is $2.87 million. The assessor's using a value about $3.6 million. So that obviously makes a huge difference. And really the big difference here is expenses. The expenses of the property, I understand, look high at 50%, but the actuals are 2.9 and the assessor's using 2.3. And Stephen, real quick, we just have a little bit of time. Can you touch on the expenses, why they're so high, and is this typical for affordable?
Sure. It is typical for affordable of this vintage. This is 1950s built property that last had a meaningful renovation, I believe, in the late 70s and early 80s, under whoever owned it at that point in time, not us. Generally, with affordable properties, you can see expenses run lower because they've been through some sort of renovation program, such as the LIHTC program. This property has not. We are working towards doing so, but it's 1950s product with a very difficult tenant base and a lot of expense that comes with that, a lot of repairs costs, a lot of wear and tear, and just older systems that are breaking down and requiring extensive capital upkeep, oftentimes on an emergency basis. So we continue to invest heavily in the property, but it's just something that, pending a large-scale redevelopment, which is what we're working with the county on to make sure that these are renewed as long-term committed and renovated affordable units. We can't quite get them to where you would expect to see them.
So columns C and E1 are internal documents that do not include everything from the general ledger pulled over. So it's just missing expenses, not such as some other cases that I brought in front of you over the last 5+ years. But this is one where they do correctly represent them and they have them, but it just was yet filled out. They basically submitted an incomplete form. And when I say they, an unauthorized person, that INE was actually signed by a tax rep company out of Colorado. Without authorization from ownership or management. The actual INE on column E2 was signed by the ownership entity under the same certifications that the information will be correct. So if you do have any other questions about column C or E1, please let us know during the question portion. I'm glad Stephen could be here to answer all those for you, because this really, when you're looking at this, if you're just looking at page 4, E2 is really the only income information we have. Now, the 2018 INE is just in line and expenses are right in line with the 2019 as well. So to use expenses about $550,000 less than actual on an affordable property, we think is a pretty large miss. What we've done is we've taken the actual NOI and the correct cap rate to 6.9, and that's where our target value of $41.6 million is. And per Virginia law, we must consider the actual income on affordable properties, and we're asking you to do that. So I think for once I didn't use all 8 of my minutes, but happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cheeketts, if you tell us about the property from the county's perspective, please.
Absolutely. And while we have the question and answer period, we can go over my next statement, because I just want to make sure I heard correctly. I don't believe that we're being accused of using improper information as much as there was using Stephen's words, Mr. Kind, I believe, that this was inadvertent on behalf of the property manager who contracted with an outside agent. It's fairly common for property managers in their contract with the property owners to have the right to appeal on the property's behalf. In fact, Altus just this year had sent in a couple of appeals that were authorized by the property manager, and we noted that and then asked them to make a correction with the property owner themselves. That being said, the board members can see for themselves the income statements that were given to us by the authorized agent at that time. So I don't believe it negates the information itself. And again, Mr. Kind and Mr. Chitlick can sort of go over why they think all the expenses weren't outlaid. But these are fairly long documents. They begin on page 23 and end, I believe, on page 39. So maybe some 7 or 8 pages each, going over virtually everything from CapEx replacements, other non-operating costs, replacement costs, turnover replacement costs, interest expenses, controllable repair and maintenance items, total controllable expenses. And so we found that made a bit more sense in regards to us only having 1 year's signed INE from the county's questionnaire viewpoint versus 2 years of internal documents. And one of the important things to note too is, as was explained by Mr. Kind and Mr. Chitlick, is they believe one of the increases in overall operating expenses is due to maintenance and repair. And yet, regardless of which column you go with, E1, which is using the internal statement, versus E2, which is using the submitted INE, maintenance and repair went down either way, either 30% on the internal document or 6% on the assigned INE. The biggest increase year over year was the admin expense column, which went up almost $500,000, some 70% of the overall increase. If you look at an IE questionnaire, when you look at the total subtotal for administrative expenses, you're talking about administrative payroll, advertising, management fee, legal fees, accounting fees, telephone, payroll, taxes, and employee benefits. While we do believe, obviously, with new ownership, there's probably going to be some increases in the admin expenses associated with the running of the property, none of those items are associated with the upkeep and maintenance of the property itself, which is essentially what we've heard not only in the write-up, but in the opening comments as far as why there was an increase year over year. Given that we do have 2 years of income statements from the property and we stabilized those, we went with our adjusted number. As we were beaten up last week with regards to the operating expenses per unit, we did make sure that we were well above the established per unit for committed affordable properties. We're at $8,000, $7,999 per unit, which is well above what was reported in 2019's income statement, and then slightly below what was reported in 2018's, but again, still very much as far as a 2-year average. Right in line with what they've reported. Given that information, we did see there's an uptick in rental income, which again is fairly common with stabilized properties, especially those that are committed affordable. There's literally wait lists to get on and join some of these properties that are throughout the county in regards to not only our workforce housing, but just in general for the amount of density that the county has. So we saw an uptick in apartment revenue year over year, 18 to 19. We saw that there is an uptick of over 3%, again, regardless of which statement you use, the income statement or the INE, of over 3% for effective gross. So as Mr. Chitlick pointed out, this really comes down to the expenses. Again, with more transparency or clarity in regards to which numbers are the most accurate, given that we had 2 years of income statements and then utilizing those, we came up with our revised column, column F, which calls for a fair market value of $52,025,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
Sir, you're muted. Mary, you're muted also.
Mr. Matzkin, can you turn your microphone on? Thank you.
For the department, you don't give us the detail on the expenses in column F, which bumped up a good bit from your original assessment before you had 2019 figures. And I agree with you. I mean, the big number is admin expenses. What, as a part of this 2.343 million in column F, what is the amount of admin expenses that you plugged in there as a share?
Yeah, so for clarity, the county never presupposes subtotals in these columns. We only present a total operating expense, which we derive from a breakdown of the INE submissions. If we don't get an INE in the case of the income statements, we're able to basically reconstruct that using the line items to create subtotals. But the county itself, as you see in column D and in column F, we never project subtotals, just a total operating expense.
Okay, well then where did you get the total? What was your rationale for getting that?
We smoothed out the years 2018 12-month income statement and 12-month income statement for 2019 and came out to a 2-year average. So if you take those two numbers.
It's right in the middle. Okay, great. It's right in the middle. It's as you said. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm sorry, just to follow up on that, it's right in the middle of what two numbers? Because I just got a different number.
If you take the 12-month income statement, column C and column E1, you get a average of 2339467. We're at 2343706.
All right, so you're not taking into consideration E2 at all?
Again, the idea is if we had more than 1 year of income questionnaire, the income expense questionnaire, that probably come into play more. But again, using the idea that we had two income statements that matched up, as opposed to then throwing in a third component that we didn't have a previous year's component for, we did not.
Okay, thank you.
We did submit a 2018. It was just after the fact. Once we learned that so much weight was being put on the 2018 internal, the owner went back, filled out the 2018 correctly, and submitted it to the county.
Okay, thank
on
you.
their form.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman?
So what was the operating expenses on 2018? To the appellant.
Just give me a moment. Stephen, do you have that? If not, I'm pulling that.
Yep, 3.078 million is the total operating costs line on the 2019 form, or 2018 form, I apologize.
Okay. That's just not on here because it was submitted after this was prepared.
I'm verifying if I.
Well, it was submitted to the county. When we got the decision from the county, it became clear that they were putting a lot of weight on the 2018 and 2019 internal documents. Note that column C's and E1 are not on Arlington's form. The front page of Arlington's form was filled out, signed, and then it was C attached, which, as you all know, is not looked upon kindly by either the DOE in the past or the assessor. So when we gave him the 2019, he said, we don't have the 2018 either. So they went back and completed that exercise and submitted it to the county. So it's not on his column. There's basically no column C2 on this, unfortunately. And this had to be submitted to the board in April, so we didn't have it until after.
Okay, other questions from board members? Mr. Lawson?
For the county, if an owner tells you that a document submitted by an agent was in fact not authorized to submit it, shouldn't that just be tossed and not considered at all?
No. So we didn't hear that the owner was not supposed to give us internal operating statements, because at the time we received them, they were in fact the authorized agent for that property. So the idea that it negates the veracity of those internal documents, they still are the numbers that were put out by the company itself. That belong to the property owner, so that should be information that we can view and use for our decision making.
But they're saying they were not authorized to submit it.
They're saying that today. That's correct.
Well, I mean, either they were or they weren't.
You're right. They were at the time that they were submitted to us. They were the authorized agent at the time that they were given to us.
When I thought we always had to have an owner's consent to this stuff.
So again, we did at the time, as we've stated in the opening statement, there's plenty of times there are contractual agreements between the property manager and the owner, that they're allowed to file income and expense forms and file to the board for equalization purposes into the department for reviews. I believe Mr. Kine, I won't put words in his mouth, but I believe Mr. Kine used the word that this particular property inadvertently was included, although previous years they were allowed. So in other words, if that contractual agreement changed at some point this year, that didn't negate the fact that they were allowed to appeal as of January 1st for the assessment purposes.
If I may, this is Stephen Kahn. So is this an appropriate time for me to jump in and clarify?
It's okay with me, yes.
Yeah. The assignment from our property management company to consider Park Shirlington was inadvertently given to this third-party tax advisor. That tax advisor was never authorized by either us as owners or by extension, we had never given our property manager the ability to authorize this third-party tax advisor to submit on our behalf.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I think I remembered reading in the appellant statement that most of the renters are falling well below the AMI covenants that are now on the property, and they're unable to raise the rent to kind of get in line with the county's rent tables. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Under the terms of our agreement with the county, who is a partner with us on this deal to provide affordable housing, not only are we rent restricted, so cannot charge above the maximum rents that the county sets out, but the residents who move in have to have income that falls below a certain level. We are well below those maximum allowable levels for our income demographic. We are well below the max allowable rents. And it's unfortunately, we do not have the benefit of an extensive waiting list at this property. The location just isn't quite what seems to be most in demand. So we are offering concessions and other things, as you can see from our reporting. Beyond that, once a resident moves in, even if, say, AMI rents allowed by the county were to increase by 4 or 5%, as you've seen tremendous growth in prior years, this property is capped at no more than 2.5% increase for existing residents, regardless of what the broader market or the AMI limits do. So we've started out below the bogey and do not have the ability to participate as the market has recovered.
Okay.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Yates or Ms. Hogan? No? Okay, Mr. Cheekas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. As just asked and answered by Mr. Hoffman, it should be noted in column F that the county actually underprojected the 2-year increase from 16 to 18 and 18 to 19. We actually projected a decrease in gross potential income of about 1.3% and about 1.2% of gross potential income. We do believe that, again, given that they are rate increases year over year, that there's one going to be expected again, regardless of if they achieve it through the increase in the AMI put out by the Virginia Housing Department or through just their internals able to ask more money per year. But again, given that we do have the 2 years income statement that we were able to stabilize, given that we're at almost $8,000 operating expense per unit, given that the maintenance repair went down year over year in regards to the main argument that the driver in operating expenses was due to upkeep and maintenance of the property. We do believe that the county's column F should be confirmed at $52,025,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Chitlick, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. So column E2 is a signed authorized document from the owner, like all INEs are submitted. And then the 2018, which has pretty much numbers that are right in line with that, are also was also submitted to the county. Instead, the county has decided that, in fact, they would rather use internal INEs from 2018 and 19 that were incomplete as testified today by the owner, as well as unauthorized when submitted to the county. In addition to that, Chris made the point of, look, my GPI is lower. Well, he's also using a 3% vacancy when actual vacancy has been 7% for 2 straight years. That alone, the fact that there's higher than normal vacancy and concessions tells you a little bit about the restrictions that Stephen mentioned. But the main factor in this case, although they've already corrected cap rate, is the expenses. The expenses were around $3 million and now $2.9 million, and the assessor's using expenses of $2.3, assuming that they can cut it by $600,000 just because somebody unauthorized submitted 2 documents to them that said those expenses were in line. He has the correct. There's no reason, even if you want to use column C, which we strongly think you shouldn't, the main factor here is that column E1 is completely incorrect and has been corrected with column E2 on the correct form and signed by the ownership.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's just among board members. I mean, I'll start. I on this particular case, certainly am sympathetic to the appellant. I think, you know, that these statements were submitted. I mean, the submission of the statements aside, I think the original assessment was very high based on what we did have. At the time when they had the assessment, we really only had column A and column C. I think that was pretty aggressive to come up with the amount that's in column D. That being said, with now getting updated information in 2019, and the 2018 isn't on here, but with the 2019, I think, you know, the department, you know, did due diligence in reducing it. I myself don't think it came down enough. You know, I took the column C expenses and the column E2 and average those at like 2.6, and it caps out at 47 million, which I think is more in line. But I'd love to hear what other people have to think, but that's kind of the direction I went in. Mr. Lawson?
Yes, ma'am. I can't remember, but I think it was last week or the week before. We had a similar property, and on page 68, there's an aerial photo, and it shows, a whole bunch of individual buildings. And on the other case, I remember we were talking about how much more it costs to maintain a campus with a bunch of individual buildings versus, say, one high-rise in Boston. And what I can't remember, and maybe someone on the board can remember, I don't remember what we ended up with expenses on that project. But I remember we went higher than what the board was allocating based on the fact that it was a campus situation.
And the age.
How much was it, Mark?
And the age was the other
the
factor.
age, yes. And the other thing is, I think that, you have agency, and if someone, submitted something they shouldn't have, and the owner indicates it shouldn't have been submitted, and they weren't properly authorized, I think you've got to go with what the owner's saying, not just assume that what was submitted before was properly done. That's my opinion.
I agree with that, yeah.
I agree as well.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, Mary, I like your approach. I think it's the total amount is probably falling where it should be. Just looking at it on a per unit basis, I think from equalization, if you compare this to other committed affordable projects that are new or much newer, it should be a lower per unit value, simply because they're capped on the amount of income they can bring in, but their operating expenses are going to be potentially much higher. So I'd support 47 million. I think that's in that neighborhood is probably where this should be.
Greg, you don't think I think the expenses should probably be increased a little more than what you're proposing, Mary. I'm
not necessarily opposed to that. I just don't know to what and how to tie it to. Because if you look at, it's, the code does say for affordables that you can look at actuals. This is tough because you've got 2 years, although we don't have the adjusted 18, so I could go higher. I just, again, didn't want to go too high and then have folks say that was too high and the NOI, too low. Mr. Penaranda, what do you have to say about that?
I did pretty much exactly the same as what you did, because I was trying to see, based on what we have, based on the information that is provided to us, not necessarily what other buildings, what other properties, or how we feel about the whole community, but based on the case itself, I did the same. I looked at what we have on the 2018 and the 2019. That is. I came up with the same average. I don't know if you came up with the same numbers. It comes to about 2,680,000 for the expenses.
Yeah, 2,680. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I did exactly the same.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah, that's pretty much on the highest end of any property that we've seen. So I don't think we can go too far. We're getting over 9,000 a unit in operating expenses. That's tax excluded. That's, I don't know, Mr. Chitlick is done talking for now, but I don't think you've showed us another case that's been at that level yet. Maybe there's still many to go this year. But even the Sheffield Court that we were looking at, that's a multi-unit, multi-building, older property, was like 6,000 a unit. So we're pretty high up there on OpEx.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mr. Lawson?
The last thing that I'll share is when it comes to affordable, though, Greg, your administrative costs are much higher. You have to keep track of income. You have to work with a tenant. You have to work with a county. And so I think your not non-hard cost administrative can be a little more expensive than a for-profit. That's the only point that I would share.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, Ms. Hogan, anything else?
No, I mean, I think I agree. I wouldn't object to seeing the expenses go higher, but I just don't see how we get to that without just picking a number or percentage. So I'm fine with what you did, Mary.
I'm fine too. And I think we'll see it next year, what it really is
Right.
boiling down to.
Right, and it did give the higher GPI and
Yeah.
obviously effective gross as well. So, all right, then I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to reduce the assessment to $47,146,900 based on averaging the expenses from column C and column E2.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. It's reduced to $47,146,900.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Greg, you know how hard it is for me to shut up and not talk. So when you do that, I'm just dying over here.
I was baiting you.
I
Do
know
not
you were.
encourage
All
him. And you're on live.
Thank you.
TV, folks.
Thanks, bye.
Okay, so 3, we're going to hold up. Okay, so it's 9:51. Why don't we take a 5-minute break here, and then we'll come back and have Ms. Borman, and then deal with the last case, depending on, I would say, though, Tracy, it is looking like the case will be heard, because I don't believe Ms. Borman will be taking an hour per case. So 9:52, so if everybody come back in 5 minutes. All right?
Sounds good.
Everybody back? No, we got Mr. Lawson. We'll give him another minute.
Can I get a sound check?
You've got
A lot of.
That was horrible.
a lot of
I feel like I was at a concert in the 60s and I'm not even that old. Is that better?
Yes.
That's much better. Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Nice to see everybody healthy and healthy.
You too.
Thank you. Rob and I have become best friends this year. We talk
Okay,
like
sorry,
2 or 3 times a week.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, we're on live TV, so we're going to keep the chit chat to a minimum.
Thank you very
and for
much.
the
I
board
forgot.
members, I'm sorry. And for the board members, make sure that you have up the additional information that was emailed to you yesterday for Ms. Borman's cases. Okay, we have Mr. Lawson finally. Okay. Moving along to the 5th case on our agenda. The RPC is 14044260875 North Randolph Street. Ms. Borman, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board, and county staff. Thank you very much for your time today. The current property is 875 North Randolph. This property is approximately 320,000 square feet, and it is occupied by the GSA, and GSA has 2 tenants in the building. The Office of Naval Research is one of the tenants and the majority tenant, and then the next tenant is the Air Force Scientific Research. The property has a couple of very small supportive retail tenants as well, but for example, Navy Federal Credit. But that is pretty much it. This building was constructed in 2004. It is leased until 2027 to these 2 large tenants that occupy the majority of the space. So we are talking a building that has prime location, prime tenancies, and long-term remaining on the lease. So this is, if you're an investor and you're out there chasing a property, this is one of the better properties that was available for sale last year. And in fact, it did sell last year. The property was widely marketed by HFF. In fact, if you have CoStar, you can still see the offering memorandum on CoStar. There were a lot of interest in the property. It was marketed for a period of 5 months. And ultimately, there were 4 bidders that qualified for the asset. And there were negotiations that took place as a result of the bidding process. The bidding process and marketing process took about 5 months. So this is a case the board heard last year. At the time that the board heard this case last year, the property had sold, and the board did not opt to reduce the assessment last year and said that, we'd look at the sale price this year. Now, I know that the board doesn't like to look at a single data point. I would say that one sale that is widely marketed to literally hundreds of institutional investors and gets 4 bids on the property in the price range of between 147 million and 151,200,000, which is where it ultimately traded, is not a property that has just one data point, because this property has been priced by the most sophisticated real estate investors in the country. The ultimate purchaser was USAA, who has a the automobile insurance company, but they also have a government fund that invests solely in GSA assets. They have bought this property. They also have bought a couple of others in the area. And they weren't ultimately, initially they were not the highest bidder, but they were the bidder that the owner felt had the best ability to close. And so they negotiated the price up to the highest bidder price, which was the $151,200,000. Now, the county has provided you with, and why is this important? And I'd like to go just for a moment to my submission that you got yesterday, which should have been attached to the appeal. And I don't know if you have that handy, but there is on page 2 of that documentation, we do a study as well every year. So on there, it says 2020 Wilkes Artis Office Building Guidelines. And basically, I do want to note there is an inconsistency on the page that I can, if you have it in front of you, the top box has a comment that says surveys received, and there it says 92. It should be 95. And then the very last box says the number of properties less than 100,000 square feet, and that says 3, and it should be 4. We got 3 surveys in on the day that we were submitting this information to the board. So this compares to the county's information, and I have it here because I want to talk a little bit about vacancy rates, cap rates, et cetera, and how the department determines these things. So the department tells you that they determine cap rates looking at market sales and other factors. And on page 5 of our supplementation are the department's office guidelines. And as you can see on those guidelines, the cap rate for this property is a 6.8% rate. It says 6.795, but it's rounded to 6.8. Now, why is that important? It's important because this is the trophy of trophies, although I hate that word, but this is the creme de la creme of property investments because of the tenancy, the term, the age of the building, and the fact that you've got GSA in there till 2027. So I'd ask you to look at, their guidelines and see that a cap rate there of 6.8 is required. Now, everybody knows how you determine a cap rate. So in this particular instance, the county references in its case that they used that CoStar reported a cap rate of 6.14%. Now, if you look at page 3 of the county's case, you see the actual income that has been reported by the prior owner and the current owner. The prior owner reported income in 2018. I'm not going to say the number, but if you take that number and you divide it by the sale price, you come up with what this property traded for, what the cap rate was. And I guess if I'm going to tell you the cap rate, you can figure that out too. But the cap rate that this property traded for was approximately 7.5% before you, and that was approximately 7.5%. So the county is using a rate on income of 6.8 when this Class A, well-tenanted, Class A credit tenant bought a building at a much higher rate. So clearly, this indicates for us that the county did not consider necessarily all of the sales in the submarket, in the market, when it determined its 2020 cap rates. And I think that is somewhat not disingenuous, but it is an error. I don't know how easy it is to switch back and forth, but if you go to page 2 of the package that we sent you, I'm going to use this just to demonstrate, and I know the county is working really hard to try to get this right, but I'm going to show you the flaws that I believe are in the methodology. So if you look at the second box on page 2, and I'm going to hold it up because I would hold it up in a board hearing. It looks like it's this piece there. If you look at box 2, what you can see is that we received 95 surveys, and Wilkes Artis is highlighted. The Department of Real Estate Assessments received 127 surveys. Of the 95 surveys that we received, we used 84 of those surveys to determine these factors. And of those 84 surveys, the only reason 11 were not used, and we provided the reasons why they weren't used, the county did not. Two were partial years, 5 of them were scheduled for demolition or were owner-occupied buildings, and 4 of them were buildings less than 100,000 square feet. Of the buildings that we received, the 84, that's 23,500,000 square feet of space in the submarket. So we used 95. We received 95. The county received 127. We used 84. We didn't change it. We didn't adjust anything. We just put them into our spreadsheet, which I have offered to share with the county and have done a little bit of sharing with them online, but it's kind of hard to do under the current circumstances. The average size is 280,000 square feet, and the average free rent on existing leases was 8.26%. And these are real figures based on INEs. The county used 79 of the 127 surveys received and did not provide any number that, in terms of building size, they didn't provide the average free rent per square foot. They didn't provide the average leasing commissions. And I'm giving you this information not to say, hey, the county's not doing its job or anything along those lines, but I am giving it to you to say that the actual numbers show different information than what is presented by the county. And that's the same with regard to cap rate. Again, the cap rate on this building traded for 7.5459%. Looking at column E on page 3, that number actually needs to be increased by $251,554. So the NOI that's currently shown in column E needs to go up by $251,054, the amount that's shown for janitorial. And that's because even though the owner uses the same management company as was used previously, the accounting software was different. And so that number was twice reported in the expenses. If you double that number, and it was bought in June, so if you double that number, you end up with a number that's $120,000 greater than what is shown in column C. So if you add 120 to column C, that is the NOI, the projected NOI in 2019. Again, the cap rate was 7.54%. The county is using 6.8. This is the creme de la creme building for a sale. So if they're using 6.8 on a building that's 100% leased to a great credit tenant, it clearly indicates that the cap rates used by the county are incorrect. I see that my 8 minutes are up. I will just close quickly and say the property was widely marketed. I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Hoffman's company didn't take a look at it. And this was the best that could be had by a credit buyer to a credit tenant, to a credit owner. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta. Mr. Peralta, have you turned your microphone on?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, board. Good morning, Eileen. Looking at this property, we did make an adjustment from last year to this year, considering the sales price of the property. We only adjusted it 0.74% from last year's assessment. We do view that the current assessment, the 2020 assessment, is in line with what the property sold for. If you can compare the two, we're within less than 1% of the sales price. When researching the sale of this property, we did find that CoStar did note and make note of the cap rate 6.14, and they did indicate a NOI on there as well. I won't point that out. I won't say that, but it is in the board packet in the notes. We didn't test the property because it was less than 1% of the sales price. And we didn't have a full year's operating history for 2019, obviously, because of the new ownership. We did, however, have the history of this property and what it has been doing in the last 3 years. And if you compare what the county has projected to the history in the last 3 years, you'll see that it's, I believe, well supported, in my opinion. That's really all I have with respect to Ms. Borman's office guidelines. I believe that there's more information that maybe she has access to. The information that I provide in the guidelines and in the our 2020 assessment year guidelines that we included to support our cap rates are evaluated, and we do take all the sales in consideration. We unfortunately are limited to the information that we have. Ms. Borman and I did speak on not great length, but briefly about some of the concessions that she found versus what we found. And I'm open. The department is open to considering the information that she has. Unfortunately, by our process, we go by all the INEs that we receive. And unfortunately, if there's not enough detail in the INEs, we're forced somewhat to omit them without a complete picture of exactly some of the terms, some of the contractual agreements in these leases. We can't adequately show that within our guidelines. So with that, I ask the board if they have any questions. We are open. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman?
So I guess, Ms. Borman, you didn't submit an INE.
The income and expense survey form was submitted. It was submitted late. The county does accurately reflects what was submitted. The owner was under the impression, the new owner was under the impression that they did not need to submit it because they only had a partial year. And as soon as Rob asked for it, we had one provided.
All right, so we don't have it. So I'll just ask you, since you've seen it, isn't there there's like a economic development grant or something that's paid every year for 10 years in order to keep O&R in this building from the county? And is that reflected on the income? Where does that kind of fall in to the income of this property?
Could you ask me that question again? And I'm going to look for that.
So I remember reading that in order to retain O&R, the county board approved a 10-year payment to the owners of the building. Every year they get $780,000. Okay. That's public knowledge. So my question is, in the sale of the building, does that $780,000 annual payment stream go to the new owner or the prior owner?
If there was a 10-year agreement, that agreement would have expired in 2014.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading that there was a 2018. July of 2018 incentive package approved by the county board to keep the federal agent in its current 314,000 square foot office space in Boston. That's 875 Randolph. This is, I mean, I'm just reading the news here, inside
I
notes.
appreciate it. No, I appreciate you that. I thought you said when it was built.
So it's relevant to me just because obviously you're making a case on cap rate, and I don't know if the income, the $780,000 a year payment from the county is reflected in the income that the buyer was expecting or the income that the seller is retaining and the buyer is not getting.
The income that I have mentioned does not include that payment. My experience has, so I would say at this point, they are not getting that payment. And if it was being received, that they would reflect that on this form. Historically, what I have seen in terms of those payments, they go to the tenant. So I would, if I was a guessing woman, I would guess that that payment is going directly to GSA, which is what we have seen on many other properties, because the incentive does nothing for the owner. The incentive is not there. Now, if the incentive was included in that amount of money, and it's not on the income and expense survey form, the cap rate obviously would be even higher.
Is Mr. Peralta, are you aware of this tax credit or tax payment by the county? Is it reflected anywhere in the documents that you received, even if they were late?
I haven't received anything, and this is news to me today. Thank you.
Great, but Rob, you do have the income and expense survey form.
I do. I thought the question was, did I know of the county payment?
Okay, other questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
A question for the department. The information that Wilkes Artis provided yesterday and Eileen referred to a few minutes ago, called building guidelines, where they list finer descriptions of the kinds of sales that go into making up what the cap rate was for last year and why they came up with a different cap rate than the department did, shows a lot of blanks for the department. Do you agree with that? And those are blanks that the fine details of the various sales are not presented for public or anybody else to view. And if that's true, why don't you provide a little bit more finer details so people understand how anybody viewing it understands how the department comes up with its cap rate?
You're asking why don't we show finer details in the sales that we evaluated?
Yes, that's exactly right. So that we know that it's, like buildings are compared to like buildings such that there's a cap rate for that sort of building versus a different sort of commercial building.
Well, what we provide is just kind of information that we can share. We do have the details more in our internal analysis of those sales. Unfortunately, we can't provide more than what we have.
But you say internal analysis of those sales. Are they publicly available for anybody to view?
I would defer to Rick and Irving, but I don't think they're on this call. Oh, well, Rick is on the call.
Yeah, this is Rick Millman, and we have to, by code, we have to keep income information confidential.
But I mean, I'm looking at the other criteria that Wilkes Artis mentions, vacancies and different, I can go through it, but similar sized buildings versus similar effective age buildings, different things that might affect your analysis for public review, because we of course get lots of cap rate disagreements among appellants in the department, and lots of times the allegation, including today on this case, is that you didn't take everything into account like we did, the appellant, and therefore your cap rate is in error. And I don't know if that's true or not, because I don't know what the department took into account, being very wary of falling out of equalization. I mean, that's an overarching thing. But I just see a lot of blanks not provided, that are relevant to the value of a building and therefore the compilation of a cap rate.
Well, with respect to our cap rates, with the cap rate used for this subject property, we are within 1% of the sales price. So I think our cap rates are supported.
Can I address that quickly?
Very briefly.
So the only reason that they're within whatever percent is because they dropped the income well below what is actually being achieved. So if you adjust the income to come up with your answer, then you are your cap rate is not correct. And I did just check, Mr. Hoffman, and that information is not, that income is not included in the income information presented.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from board members? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. Looking at this property, I believe the department did a good job, in my opinion, capturing the history of this property in the 2020 assessment. We did look at the rents that are achieved. The property is 100% occupied. We did afford our guideline vacancy for this property. Looking at the expenses, we're in line with what the history of this property has shown, if not on the top end of that scale. And, our cap rates are in equalization with other properties built similarly in the year that this built. We asked the board to confirm the case. The valuation is less than 1% of the sales price, which occurred mid-year last year. And to say that this property appreciated, 0.75% from the purchase price to the valuation date, I think is reasonable. I asked the board to confirm the case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Foreman, if you take a minute, please, to wrap up.
The Constitution of Virginia requires that property be assessed at fair market value and never in excess of fair market value. This property was marketed over a 5-month period, and a number of people weighed in on it, some of the biggest names in commercial real estate that I have been asked not to disclose. But if you know who they are that buys GSA quality product, they were in on this deal. The sale is the best indicator of fair market value. Unlike most leases, GSA, it tends to be somewhat flatter. A lot of people will tell you that they add an additional amount to the cap rate for the flatness of the lease. But regardless, this property, the income has changed and it will continue to change. And the cap rate is what it was. The main thing here, though, is the property sold. It is not a single data point because of the way it was marketed. It's not like I came to you and said, Mr. X, here's my property, please buy it. The sale price is the best indicator of fair market value, and the cap rate paid is an indicator that the county's guidelines are wrong.
Okay, thank you. It's just among the board members, please. Comments? Mr. Lawson.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and start off. Greg's point about this payment that is being made would probably have been shown on the settlement sheet. And I don't know how it would have been adjusted, but I would think that it would have been addressed in the settlement sheet in some way. As far as the cap rate, and I guess, Eileen, you're setting this up for future cases rather than this one, because it's kind of off on a tangent. But, you can't really quantify by way of a cap rate what Arlington, the value of being in Arlington. And Robert Smith, who ran Charles E. Smith, he used to say, if I'm going to make a mistake, I make it in Arlington. And the reason is, when the bad times come, and tenants are going bankrupt and people are losing property and it's being given back to lenders and so forth, it doesn't seem to happen much in Arlington. And you also have the metro system, you have the school system, and it's just a great community. And so these are, you can't really quantify these, but that's why I personally have not questioned the county's cap rates, even if they seem a little higher, because, you know, we often see property selling, especially right now. I've been quite surprised. We often see property selling higher than its assessed value. So to kind of sum all that up, I'm okay with the county on this in this particular instance.
Other comments? I have comments, but I'll let people chat. Mr. Metzgen.
A quick comment on the appellant's correct allusion that in the modern assessment from the department, the income went down, but it went down because the department plugged in a guideline vacancy rate that really doesn't apply to a federally leased building, but nonetheless they did it anyway. Now maybe the department got lucky and ended up with an assessment way less than 1% of a modern sales price, but I mean, that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. I just wanted to comment on that.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I think that the difference between the appellant's requested value and the department's is pretty small. Next year we'll see INEs. We'll have more information to go on, and I would support the departments right now, considering that the sale was 6 months prior to the date of valuation that it closed, and that process began 5 months prior to the actual closing. So, you know, almost a year has passed since those bidders actually put a number on that property. So I could see that there'd be a small increase, especially given that cap rates have compressed in that time.
Yeah, I agree. I look at this and think, you know, take the sale out of it. And if you just look at the performance of the property, and it's pretty stable. I mean, the GSA lease till 2027. I mean, it has got some stable income coming in. Actually, the assessment is low. I mean, if you look at just the average of the 3 years reported that we have on there, it would cap out at 162.5. You know, that being said, I think the department did take into consideration the lease. You know, I have absolutely zero problem with the assessment.
I agree. I think everything is in line. Everything is in, you know, based on what we normally see with other buildings. I think this is more than in line that, you know, to make any change to what the county has.
Okay, Mr. Yates or Ms. Hogan, anything additional? Unmute your phone or unmute your microphone. Mr. Yates,
yeah, I'm good with the county.
Okay.
I was hard pressed to, when I went over this, to find anything that I didn't think the county caught it on. So I'm fine with the county.
Okay. All right, that being said, I will make a motion to confirm the county. Do I have a second? Mr. Metzgen is a second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No, it's 7-0. Okay, the county is confirmed at the 152, 345, 400. Okay, moving to the next case on the agenda, RPC 34020-267, 2001 South Clark Street. Ms. Borman, if you'd start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property. Your microphone is muted, please.
Thank you. This property was built in 1967. The county shows it as built in 1968 with an effective age that is 1978. Last year, the board heard this case and reduced the assessment by using an effective age of prior to 1975. And this building is, in fact, at the end of its economic life. The owner is no longer trying to lease it. If you're looking at CoStar, CoStar lists it as 2001 Richmond Highway instead of 2001 South Clark Street if you can't find it. The county looked at the property, did a test, so to speak, but did not show it. Actually, they did show it under column F. For some reason, they call it operating year 2020. I don't know why they do, since it's not operating year 2020, but it's their test. And in that test, they increased the rent from $32 to $33 a square foot. The taxpayer used $32 a square foot. The net effective rent at the property is $32.20 per square foot. So the county increased it to $33. The rent used on the vacant space, the county initially used 25 and increased it to 28 on review. The actual net effective rents on new leases is much closer to the original figure. There are a number of leases that were signed in 2019. They're all short term because the building is going out of service. Clearly, it is not a building that should have an age increase in its assessment. So we stand by the position that the rent that should be used is $32 a square foot, that there was no justification for the county increasing it to $33 because the net effective rate is after concessions, not including build out, but just free rent is $32.20, $32.30. The vacant space, $25 a square foot, should stay in place. The other areas of income, you know, the county in its test used the actuals. We have no problem with that. Vacancy rate 25%, we have no problem with that. $10 per square foot in expenses. We do believe the cap rate should be increased to reflect the actual age of the property. It seems a little bit arbitrary to take it and make it a 1978 building when in fact it's so old it's going out of service. And the 1975 and earlier cap rate is 8.293. I think that the county is rounding it to 8.29. And we would ask that column G be used, that the cap rate be adjusted to reflect the 1975 or older buildings, again, built in 1967, and that the TIs be in, well, I would leave the TIs at 70, simply because they're not really leasing it up. Last year, the board increased them to 75. The building is in terrible, terrible condition. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just going over this case. I don't believe that, now I could be wrong, but I don't think the cap rate was an issue just based on what was presented in the pro forma in Ms. Foreman's case. And I know that she's at liberty to change or ask for variations. I'm not trying to speak for her, but I thought I heard her correctly that she wanted to change the cap rate on this case. I thought we were in agreement based on what was presented. But moving forward, when looking at this case, I did find that there were changes that needed to be made based on the rent roll analysis that I performed. Similarly, with other office buildings that undergo review, I look at a few metrics that are, that would sway my opinion and assessment with the current years or the most recent 2019 I&E rent roll. And you'll see those metrics that I indicated there on our summary page at the bottom. I reiterated that in the DRIA comments section before this page, the summary sheet. And I'd like the board to really consider those metrics. I did see that there was a difference, a major difference between what the older, longer term leases were averaging versus the short term leases, more current leases, if you will. Upon department hearing, Ms. Borman did indicate, as she stated, that it's at the end of its economic life, and they're proposing, I believe, a renovation to be conducted soon in the near future. So that would explain to me the short-term leases. Now, I don't believe, it is my opinion, that those short-term leases aren't market value. However, I did take those into consideration when valuing this property, and that, in my opinion, should take care of the effective age issue that Ms. Borman is pointing out this morning. When looking at this property, I'd like to point out in row 1 just exactly how the department shows in our test column. Ms. Borman is correct that that column should be labeled test operation year 2020. And when you look at column row 1, this is what the county is projecting this property to achieve for as of January 1st, 2020. And if you were to compare that to what is in column F to column E, row 1, you'll see that there's a major difference there. Along with that, you have to look at what the county is subtracting from that value as well. So in column E, row 1, that's the value that they're reporting. In column F, row 1, this is what we're showing that they could achieve at the rate that they're showing. And along with that, we deduct a 25% vacancy on top of that. So if in operating year 2019, this is what they're reporting as actual, we're actually subtracting 25% of what we're projecting they would make. So further, I'd like to discuss the rent roll analysis. And this is very important. It is how I view every property under review. And even so, when we're doing the valuation for the first of the year, I look at all the tenants, what they're paying in base rent, and we look at the overall average. Fortunately, during this year, Eileen and I have been going over these rent rolls because I personally want to get it right, and she's been able to go over those numbers with me, which I think improved our relationship, if I may say. Going through and considering the concessions which the department found through our analysis of all the leases that had all the detailed information that we could actually quantify a concession, we did come up with 6%, which our guidelines do note for 2020. And overall, the leases, again, I'm pointing to my metrics in the summary sheet. The averages are listed there, and so we deduct from those averages the 6%, and that's why we come up with our per square foot rate in our test. So I asked the board to strongly consider the test valuation. It is, in my opinion, in support, although it is a little lower than what we had initially in the 2020 assessment. I asked the board to consider that value and consider the metrics behind that value. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, questions from board members? No questions? All right, Mr. Metz.
Very quick question for the appellant. Your little bit difference in suggested cap rate from the department, little difference, That's based on your analysis through the documentation that you presented in the last case? Your own
No,
analysis?
the cap rate that I just referenced, I think you're looking at what's on page 3. That is, my understanding is the county is rounding. That would be the county's rate unrounded for the bid tax. So if you were to compare apples to apples, the county's rate on the appellant at 7.93 would be the county's rate of 7.79. My point is that the cap rate, that this is a 1967 building and it's arbitrarily assigned a effective age of 1978. That after review of the building and looking at it last year, that the board found that it should be valued as a 1975 building, which had a cap rate of 8.293 this year, or maybe it's 8.29 rounded. And that's what we were asking the board to use.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? No? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. Again, for this property, we did consider the most recent income and expense. We did afford, I think, a considerable amount of concessions for this property, given what they've reported and what they're not reporting, I should say, for the amount of square feet that is not occupied. So when looking at the reported income for this property, you have to strongly consider what's not reported as well, in my opinion. And you'll see that we did take a conservative view as to what the property can achieve, the actual income versus what the market can achieve, I think is a big difference here. You know, in the test, we did consider a blend, if you will, of what the long-term versus the short-term leases for this property can achieve. I think that I will end there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Foreman?
If you look at the history of the property, you can see that the amount that we're capitalizing of NOI in our pro forma is $2,315,000. The actual history in 2019, they earned $2 million. Prior years, $2,000,001, and before that, $1,007,000 and $1,008,000. So the performance estimated by the county clearly is in excess of what has occurred at the property. If the owners felt that they could or knew, and this is JBG, so they own, you know, quite a bit of properties in this market, if they thought they could rent it for more money, or if they could rent the building in its current condition and keep the occupancy up, there's no reason that they would take it out of service. So looking at the actual income justifies certainly a much lower assessment. Looking at the condition of the property and the age, the actual age of the property justifies a much higher capitalization rate. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's just among board members. Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I mean, last year, I think I was probably the most vocal in thinking that this was a 1975 or before building, that it should go in that category, and I don't think anything's really changed. It was built in '68. It's functionally obsolete. The owner's pretty much given up to just renting to a bunch of, you know, kind of an eccentric mix of small tenants who will take what they can get on small spaces. And so I would support, again, using the cap rate for the 1975. I think if you do that with the county's NOI number, you end up $28,316,400, which is just slightly above the 2019 value.
Okay, other comments? Mr. Lawson?
Let me ask Greg, the only thing you're suggesting adjusting is cap rate?
That's correct.
Okay, that was kind of where I was as well.
Right, just to clarify though, he's suggesting to change the effective age, which is causing the change in the cap rate, not that we're changing the cap rate.
Correct.
Right, I just want to make sure that the record shows that. Okay, is everybody in agreement with that, or?
Oh, let me just, you're suggesting to change to what year?
1975.
Because according to the guidelines, from 1975 to 79, it's a cap rate.
Oh, I mean, prior, there's a less than 1975 category. So December 31st, 1974.
Okay, well, I don't know if I would go with that. I mean, we made the change last year already, and just to, you know, make another adjustment, make another change to the effective age, I don't know if I would do that. I think I'm okay. I'm okay with the revised assessment. I know it's a minor difference, but I think I'm good with that.
I can live with your number, Greg.
All right.
I agree.
Okay. Okay, I think you're good to
Sure,
go.
I'll motion to reduce the effective date to 1974. And with that, the assessed value would be reduced to $28,316,400.
Okay, we have a motion by Greg.
I'll second.
And we have a second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Jose, are you opposed?
Oh, yes, I am opposed.
Okay, so it's 6-1 without Mr. Penaranda. The assessment's reduced to $28,316,400. Thank you, Ms. Borman.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board, and county staff.
Thank you, Ms. Bourne. Have a good day,
Okay.
everyone.
Mr. Peralta, thank you. We have Mr. Chikas back. And do we have Tracy back on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so just for the board members, just to bring current on this RPC number, Rosa received an email yesterday to postpone the case. Generally speaking, we don't do that. I'm open to discussion with the board, or do we continue to hear the case?
I'd just like to hear justification for the request.
Okay, Tracy?
We were hoping that our client could make this call, the owner of the Lamar Apartments, but she is unable to be here. So if there were board questions, she wouldn't be able to field them.
Yeah, unfortunately, just based on the schedule and the late notice of it, and that we couldn't plug somebody in and there's time still on the agenda, my feeling would be not to extend the extension. We've got an agent that represents the appellant. I'll consider what other people feel.
I agree with that, and I think you have to treat applicants. You have to treat everyone the same. And we had a recent request, I think it was by Tom Schultz, to defer when he couldn't be here, and I recused myself, but the board went ahead and heard it. So I agree with you, Mary.
Okay, any opposition from any board member?
No,
Okay,
I
Tracy,
think
then.
we should hear. I think we should hear.
I can't hear you, Mr. Penaranda.
I agree. I think we should go ahead and hear the case.
All right, Tracy, then we will hear the case. So the final case that we have on the agenda is RPC 16025014, 1720 North Quinn Street. And Tracy, can you tell me your last name?
It's Themak, Themak.
Okay. All right, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about your property.
Sure. We had, I think at this point, we stand on the record that was submitted to staff. The only thing we would add to keep it brief is that a very similarly situated property at 1210 North Quinn Street The North Quinn Apartments is owned by the same property owner here. And on April 6th, there was a determination of a reduction in the assessment there for the building from $1,776,600 to $1,265,000. And I think in comparing those two, I think similar justifications for the reduction apply to Lamar Apartments. Lamar has 26 units, 3 stories, built in 1940. These apartments are referred to as the Barak Apartments, 36 units, 3 stories, built in 1943 along the same street. So I guess that would be the additional information we would want to have considered today.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas?
Yes, members of the board, essentially direct your attention to the summary sheet as provided. When we're looking at the income over the last 4 years, we'll see that there was a very modest increase in gross potential income in 2019. Otherwise, property's been fairly stable over the last 3 years or so. But I would note that the county is actually below both the 2 and 3 year gross potential averages at the property. We projected some $2,200 or so below what was achieved in 2019. Effective gross increased by about 1.6% in the calendar year 2019. And while we are a bit high on the projection made by the county of approximately $9,700, we're also approximately $13,000 above the 2019's projection for operating expenses compared to what was achieved at the property. When we looked at a 3 year average, we were still high at about approximately $4,600. We're high when you look at a per unit value. The county's at about $5,850 per unit. The property reported $5,300 per unit. And that, of course, led to the county under projecting the achievable income as far as net operating income by approximately $3,700. We saw increases at the property net operating income of almost 14.6% in 2018 and another 3% in 2019. This being achieved through a fair amount of stabilization and true vacancy. Saw a huge uptick in 17 of about 14%, but that came down to just shy of 6% in 18 and just above 5% in 2019. Given the metrics that we've detailed, given the under projections and gross potential income and over projections and operating expenses at the property, and the under projection and net operating income, we do believe that the property should be confirmed with a 2020 real property assessment of $5,550,100. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, just from the appellant, is your estimate of value is $1,650,000 for this property?
It was submitted, yes, by Bill Barnes. Are you looking at the affidavit?
Yeah.
Yes. That was based on, let me bring that up here. That was based on his assessment of using a range of a 4.5 cap, which would be in the optimum range for a seller, to a 7% cap, which would be in the acceptable range for a buyer. So he valued the property based on income at between 1.3 and 3.
And this is not a committed affordable?
No.
So we realize that's $66,000 a unit? Are you aware of any other properties in Arlington that are valued at $66,000 a unit or less?
I'm not.
Okay.
Mr. Metzger.
Question for the department. This is a very stable property and stabilized. And the one number, and looking at columns D and E, it all makes sense except for line 11. Yes, Meg, I'm sorry, total vacancy. the total vacancy in this stable building has always been much higher than the guidelines, which is what I presume you plugged in, 3%, 15, and I was wondering, based on the history, whereas everything else is consistent year over year, that you chose to, I don't mean this negatively, but underplay the consistent amount of vacancy. Too many words, sorry.
Yeah, so if Mr. Metzgen, if you're familiar with how the department generally operates, is we always will plug in the guideline vacancy concession that's dictated by the guidebook. In this case, for a garden, it's 3%. It's one of those things where we may have been able to run a test column that would be more equitable with the effective gross that's been achieved at the property. But if you kind of do quick math and you see that we're about $10,000 high, you were also, again, about $14,000 high on the projections for operating expenses. So they're a bit of a wash, if you will, as far as if we were to make a test column, that we obviously would project a bit lower on the operating expenses that are incurred at the property.
That's responsive. Thank you.
Sir.
Okay, any final questions from board members? No, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, ma'am. Just purely based on the metrics of the property, again, looking at our under projections in regards to gross potential and our over projections in regards to the operating expense, given that our operating expense per unit is higher than what was achieved at the property itself. And most important, that's increase in net operating income year over year. We do believe that the county should be confirmed at $5,550,100. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tracy, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yeah, again, I would ask the board to consider the discrepancy between this and a very similarly situated property. And again, the vacancy rate at 92% as of January of this year, not 3. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This is just among the board members now. I mean, I think this is a tough one, from the appellant standpoint. I mean, I think what's provided, Mr. Hoffman, I was going exactly where you went, and I'm like, there's no way this can be assessed at $66,000 per unit. And to me, with the burden of proof on the appellant, I don't see any reason that the county's wrong. I mean, the county ends up being, they average $222 a unit, which I think is certainly more in line for a North Arlington garden style apartment complex. So other comments?
I couldn't see where the county was off. I couldn't find anything.
Mr. Metzgen?
I'll just respond to Mary, what you said. I would like to have seen the details on why these similar apartments that are owned by the same appellant, therefore have lots of access to data, weren't presented to us.
Right.
And I would have been a lot more sympathetic to this 13+% increase. But since we don't have that, and we do have good data explained well by the department on this particular property, I got to go with what the department has come up with.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Mr. Lawson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I know we look at these things based on income, and yet, this is a great property, and I'm aware of transactions that are going on behind it, adjacent to it, and so forth. And I don't think we can ignore the fact that, should this project be raised, it would be a heck of a lot more valuable than $1,650,000. So I'm with the county on this.
All right, Ms. Hogan or Mr. Penaranda, any additional?
No, I'm pretty much with all the comments that were made. I don't think we have enough information or documentation to make any changes, just an opinion of value from Mr. Barnes, but to me, that's not enough.
I couldn't say anything to make adjustments on.
All right. Okay, then I will Move to confirm the county at 5,550,100.
I'll second.
Okay, Mary Dooley and Ms. Hogan for a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. County's confirmed at 5,550,100.
Thank you, Ms. Damac. Thank you, board members.
I'm sorry?
Just saying thank you to everyone.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you. Oh, she's already gone. Okay. All right. Any other business from board members or the county staff? Okay, then we will adjourn here at 11:03 and re-adjourn next Tuesday, July 28th at 9 a.m. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Sounds
Bye-bye.
good. Bye-bye.